it. Let's talk to Sheldon Thomas, who's a consultant for Gangsline. As we said before, it works with local authorities and the organisation to help prevent knife crime. Let's see what he's got to say about the stop and search scenario. Sheldon, very good morning to you. Welcome to Morning Glory.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sheldon. I mean, I guess the question for most of us, in amongst all of the debates that will go on around stop and search, is what do you think, as a former member of a gang and somebody who works with them now, is the main reason why so many young men in particular are walking around with knives?
I mean, it's a lot to do with their own mindset, but more importantly, it's to do with social media. Things have changed in the last 10, maybe 12 years with social media and the influence that other young people have over other young people in terms of going on social media, glamorizing this lifestyle of being a gangster, being a gang member, doing county lines. And everyone knows if you're selling drugs, you're going to have to carry a weapons. In my days, in the late 70s, early 80s and early 90s, throughout the 80s and the 90s, we all had guns. So most of us have gone through this kind of dilemma. Now, the problem is, back in my days, people weren't really interested because only certain people were being killed at that time. Right. It was mainly poor white kids in poor neighborhoods or black kids in certain neighborhoods. Now, knife crime affects everyone because it's a culture on the streets. It's now a culture amongst young people, and it isn't got anything to do with color per se, in terms of people always trying to say that, oh, it's black kids. But if you take London out of the equation, it's all white kids. Yeah. So people need to be very careful when they use the word black kids, because that only applies in London and certain parts of Birmingham. Yeah. But when you start going into places like Nottingham, Sheffield, Liverpool, it's all white kids. Yeah. So the question isn't about colour now. The question is, how do you break a culture, which is the mindset? You can't just deliver a gangs prevention workshop in a school or a knife crime workshop in a school and think that's it, because the problem is most of the people delivering these knife crime preventions they've never lived it, they have no relatability a lot of the times, and they are the ones normally get the funding around all of these situations. So we're creating a kind of situation where programs are going into the schools, but the people delivering it have no lived experience whatsoever. And so the young people know that, and they're not really paying attention. So what you need now is more investment, not just to the police. They need investments to small community organizations who are closely linked to these young people in these neighborhoods, who have an understanding of who these young people are, who knows how they think because they've lived it themselves. And I think that will begin to make some inroads. And if we deliver in primary schools, because the biggest problem we have is not educating young men and young girls at a very young age, so that by the time they transition into secondary school, they already know what to look out for. But if we're going to wait to go into a secondary school, it's too late.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, you're right to talk about places outside of London, because I mean, only in sort of recent memory, last couple of weeks, there was a stabbing incident in a school in Sheffield. There was a stabbing incident in a school in Wales, I think it was in Swansea, which was perpetrated by a woman, a girl. Those have both now resulted in charges, so we can't really go into what actually happened. But in terms of stop and search, and I'm just looking at some figures here, stop and searches have increased from a low of 280,000 in 2017. They've continued to drop, certainly in the Metropolitan Police, to 137,000 in 23-24. So, I mean, it's probably not right to say that there's no stop and search going on, is it?
Well, no, I wouldn't say there's no stop and search. The problem is now they may be doing it a lot better than they were before. Yeah. Because number one, we have to admit that when they were doing it a few years back, stop and search, there was no evidence to say they were making any difference in taking the knives or guns off the street. Right. Because I think there was a lot of racial profiling around that, and again going to that situation where they think it's all black kids. Yeah. So I think once they've realised, and obviously the outrage of the community against stop and search, because we grew up under that. I grew up under sus law where we were stopped even though we weren't doing anything. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I wasn't a bad person, because I was. I'm not suggesting that for 1 second. But there was a lot of young black kids in my time who were never never, ever a part of it. And because of the way they were treated under the stop and search back then, which was a sus law, they were hurt and they were angry towards the police. And that anger has continued with the black community for decades. And that's where we are now. So my thing is, stop and search is important, but it has to be done with intel, not just racial profiling. And we have to acknowledge that the police have got to understand more about the different cultures that are operating in different cities.
Well, presumably they're worried and frightened, as they are about many things, the police as well, about doing anything these days, because whatever they do, they seem to get criticised. But let me ask you this, if I may, Sheldon. I mean, when you were in a gang and you knew that you might get stopped and searched by a police officer, did that have any effects on what you did? Did it stop you carrying a knife? Did it stop you behaving in any particular way? Did you still take the chance?
No. I mean, we in our days, we carried guns anyways. But, you know, you've got to understand, when you're on the streets, we know what to look out for. We know what a policeman looks like, whether they're in a uniform or in an unmarked car or not in a uniform. We know how they are. We know how they profile. The reason why it didn't stop me back then is because of the anger I had towards this country, the way they treated me as a black man for at least the first 18 to 20 years of my life. The brutality that many young black men faced at that time by the police made us so angry that nothing would have stopped us from being in a gang. Because remember, when we started a gang was to protect ourselves from racist police officers and the National Front, because we were targeted as young children growing up by police officers and by the National Front. So no, I would say that the stop and search didn't make any difference to us, because number one, no one walked streets with their guns. We had certain places we would put it, so there's no way they would have found anything on us. But what we're saying is, when you ask that question, would it have made a difference to us back then? The answer is no.
Yeah.
Because
what's interesting in what you said, and I take what you said seriously, Sheldon, but you know, we're now talking about a very different time. So when we're talking now about the gun culture or the knife culture, we were talking about a drive-by shooting last night in North London, which is a relatively unusual thing to happen, but is happening more often. You've got now, as you say, a great many people who are not black, who presumably don't have a beef with the police, who do not have any reason to feel as if they've been discriminated against, now walking around with knives. And it's actually worse now than it was in your day. So why are they doing it?
Because of the culture. Remember, we're talking about a music that now is going across. So let me give you an example. When I was on road, reggae music was the number one, was the only music. There was no hip hop, there was no garage, no house, none of that was invented.
Drill.
No drill, none of that. So you've got to understand, we were under the guise of reggae music, and we didn't have social media. Today, what you have are social media that goes out of its way promoting drill music that literally promotes this lifestyle. Yeah. So what happens is, a young person in Reading who is in a middle-class house, who's got both his parents, is now listening to drill music. White kids listen to drill music more than black kids. And we've got to understand, even though the people who make drill music are black, are 90% black, the people who listen to it are 90% white kids.
And are they acting it out? Are they wanting to be the big I am?
They are assimilating this culture that they think is black culture. So they come up. If you listen to the language of some of these white kids, you would have thought they're black.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I hear them every day in Bermondsey, you know. They're using this kind of strange South London patois.
Yeah, and so that's what happens. So when you ask the question, why is it getting worse? Social media's got a lot to answer. YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, all of these social media platforms need to take responsibility for allowing these young men and women to post these images up that is actually promoting this lifestyle. So it's not now about who's been brutally brutalized by the police or by any particular organization. It's now a culture that is in the mindset. And that's why young people say, well, if I don't have a knife and that other person's got a knife, I'm going to get hurt, so I'm going to carry a knife. So it's all about that lifestyle. And we are talking about drugs as well.
Yeah. and that is the big problem. Sheldon, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for your insight. Sheldon Thomas, a consultant for Gangsline, working with local authorities to try and help prevent knife crime, which is getting, of course, worse. But, you know, there is no quick fix for this, it seems to me. The Tories are saying bring back more stop and search, but that hasn't actually ever gone away. There is some stop and search going on. Let us know what you know from where you are, from your perspective, and which part of the country you're in, because we're not just talking about London. We're talking about Sheffield, where there was a stabbing in a school. We're talking about Wales, where there was a stabbing in a school. We're talking about the rest of the country, the county lines, the people I know from my own kids' experience down in Sussex. You know, there are people carrying knives around small towns. It's absolutely getting out of hand. And so the question would be, whether stop and search works or not, should we bring back more of it? What's your answer to it? What should we do? 0344 499 1000. Because if you've got teenage boys in particular, you must fear for their lives, because whenever they go out, you don't know if they're going to come back. And you don't know, and I'm not saying this to make it more dramatic than it is, because it's not, but you don't know if they go out for the night, whether they're going to get into some kind of trouble, whether they're going to get into some kind of fight, and whether in that fight and in that sort of trouble, they're going to get knifed, because that is what's going on.